To fully enjoy Give Me Mine, start at Chapter 1 and follow through to the most current video. To enhance the story, narration may be slightly different than the actual story in the book. Get your copy today and follow along. Enjoy. Two weeks passed and she didn't hear from Scottie. This wasn't the way she wanted them to end, but she still had vivid memories of that special day they shared. Sometimes just thinking about how sexy he was made her touch herself. She remembered every little detail about him. She remembered his scent, his deep voice, and his strong arms. She tried and tried to keep him off of her mind and accept it as a thing of the past, but she just couldn't. She thought about him a lot. Maybe he noticed the money missing from his car. Or maybe I was just a quick piece of ass for him, she thought to herself. But he had too much dough to be missing a measly $100. And there were at least 30 $100 bills wrapped in that rubber band. So he couldn't have missed one. Whatever the case was, she had far too many things to worry about right now, other than him. She was working with her last $10 and was starting to get desperate. Just 2 blocks down and around the corner from her house was Chow's drugstore. She frequently visited the small store because it was an easy target for her. Today she was there shoplifting, which was a usual thing for her because Mr. Chow adored Janay. He usually sparked up a conversation with her and said things in Chinese that she didn't understand. And she knew they were inappropriate and sexual, but every time she just smiled innocently because her pockets were full of things from his store. So she didn't mind him talking shit in Chinese. Standing at the counter, she acted like she didn't notice Mr. Chow's eyes scan up and down her body. And this time, it was Janay who initiated the conversation. "Excuse me, mister. I think I must have lost my money on the way here." "Damn. If you just let me..." Janay didn't even finish her sentence, and Mr. Chow was nodding his head, agreeing to let her take everything she had in her hands and pay him another time. Sure, you take, he said. She chuckled because his voice was so funny. Janay turned on her quick wit with a little charm and began to flatter Mr. Chow with compliments, some smiles, and more eye-batting. "You need some help around here? I can help you with some stuff if you need," Janay offered. Sure, you help, he said, smiling deviously at her. And one thing led to another, and he offered her a job that she couldn't turn down. And when he asked her age, she didn't think twice about adding 2 years to her real age. 17 was still too young to be working in a drugstore during school hours, but Mr. Chow's mind was perverted, and he didn't care about that. He handed her an application just so he could look more professional, then gazed over her shoulder as she filled it out. Janay had no phone, so she had to stop in on a daily basis to check on the job status. She wasn't expecting to be hired, but she stopped in one day and he told her to come tomorrow ready to work. He never ever questioned her education status, never questioned her family life or anything about her. He just gazed at her with lust all over his face. And he was just pleased to be in her face all day. On her first day, she was so excited at the thought of having a little money in her pocket. She arrived 30 minutes early to make a good impression. Mr. Chow stared at her breast the whole time while he was showing her how to use the cash register, which made Janay very uncomfortable. She tried to keep a smile on her face and act like he was a good teacher, but it was hard to look at his face. He was very unattractive. And the way he pronounced her name with his annoying voice drove her crazy.
Janay, Janay,
She tried her best to help him say Janay instead of Johnny,
Janay, Janay.
but he just couldn't do it. And she just gave up. Her first day went by smooth and easy without her lifting 1 penny from the register. And even though Mr. Chow never left her side, she still could have pulled it off, walking out of there with the whole register in her pocket if she wanted to. He looked into her eyes most of the day, practically drooling at the mouth. The small store was stocked with mostly personal stuff that every home needs. It also had a small variety of foods and a cooler with some frozen stuff. Her main focus was getting the things that her home shouldn't be without. She needed all the basic essentials she had before Diane got a hold of them. Janay even needed little things like alcohol, tissue, household cleaners, and kitchen supplies. And whether she paid for it or not, she had to have it. That was just one of the many reasons she accepted the minimum wage position. She had put in a full 8 hours and was beat. She slowly walked home from work feeling like a young, hard-working, independent woman. Making her own money, setting her own rules and boundaries, and living just as she pleased. And she liked that feeling. And just as she began to stick her key in the door, she heard a horn behind her. She turned around and saw Scottie's white Lexus still shining 2 weeks later. It was sitting in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. And she knew he was waiting for her. And she couldn't hold back the smile that came across her face and wasn't about to play hard to get this time. So in about 5 seconds flat, she ran to his car and jumped into the passenger seat. And this time, the price of her meal doubled. They sat in a booth at Ponderosa Steakhouse. And she impatiently waited for her medium rare T-bone steak and jumbo fried shrimp. Sipping on a Coke, she listened to him try to explain where he had been for the past 2 weeks. And he told her a really believable story about being in Gary, Indiana, taking care of some business.
Yo, man, I make moves,
he said while she listened.
I be having shit to do out here.
She replied. She didn't question him or really didn't even care. I mean, he could have told her any bullshit and it wouldn't have mattered one bit. Being there with him right now was all she cared about. Once the waiter finished placing their food on the table, Janay immediately dug in. Scottie pulled a small black pager from his waist. He handed it to her, and she saw the number taped to the clip. Holding the pager in her hand, she looked at it and thought about how she would rather have the money instead. It looked to be at least worth about $200. It was one of those new Motorola ones with 2 buttons. It lit up when Janay pressed one of the buttons, but she wasn't impressed. Look, I need you to take this. Stay in contact with me at all times. If I beep you, I need you to respond ASAP. You hear? Janay nodded her head yes, but couldn't understand why he needed her. And she didn't even ask, because that meant that she'd have to stop eating, and she didn't want to do that. The only problem was that she didn't have a phone, but she was no stranger to the payphone up the street. They finished their food, and before they left the restaurant, Janay made sure that when Scottie's back was turned, she grabbed the $20 tip that he left under the A1 steak sauce bottle. She had been watching that $20 from the moment he placed it there. She crossed her fingers and toes, praying that he would take her to the mall like he did the last time, but it didn't happen. He drove her straight home and insisted on using her bathroom.
Shit, I need to come in your crib and piss.
Shit. She was caught off guard and started to panic. She couldn't say no, though. She couldn't think of a good excuse fast enough, so the only thing she could do was stand there in silence. It was too late.
Man, come on. Come on, man,
he said while grabbing a handful of his pants by his zipper to let Janay know that he really had to go. He parked, and when he entered her house, Janay could tell by the look on his face that he was shocked by what he saw. Her TV sat on 2 milk crates in the living room. Those crates had been a TV stand to her for the past 2 years. Against the bare wall in front of it was her chair. Who and where it came from was a mystery to Janay. One morning she woke up and it was just there, so she put it to use. To her, it was no different from a fancy recliner. Her butt had made its imprint in the chair right where she wanted. And if anyone else were to sit there, she'd know it. Across the room was a lawn chair with a folding card table. That set actually came with 3 more chairs, but now only one was left. It was something that Diane used often when it was her turn to host the monthly card games with her friends. Janay used to help her mother push the furniture aside and pull the folding table and chairs out of the closet. They'd play cards all night, and Janay thought about how much fun that used to be. Now, 3 chairs had disappeared. They were probably sold for a few bucks when Diane was a few dollars short of a hit. In her bedroom, there was a twin mattress on the floor. And on top of it was her Smurf's sleeping bag that she had managed to hang on to after all these years. It was like a child's favorite blanket. It was one of the few things that Janay could remember ever getting as a gift from her mother and keeping for so long. No matter how desperate Diane became, she knew that Janay's sleeping bag was off limits. Just when Janay thought it couldn't get any worse, she noticed a few roaches on the wall. They always pick the perfect time, Janay thought to herself.
So here they were, roaming freely, and that pissed Janay off. She looked to the left, and there were 2 on the other wall, too. And on his way out of the bathroom, Scottie had to pass through the kitchen. Janay ran over and hit the light switch off. It was a mess in there. She was extremely embarrassed and was positive that Scottie wouldn't want to see her again. And she was so pissed off at Diane right now that tears began to form in her eyes. This is all her fault, she thought. She could hear Scottie shaking the flush handle, and Janay, she knew that it didn't work. And she was the only one who knew how to fix the chain and ball cock inside of the tank. After trying several times, he gave up and came from the bathroom. Before he could see her face, she quickly used her sleeve to wipe the tears that were just about to fall. He headed out the door and turned to her.
Hey, yo, make sure you home tomorrow at 12,
he said. Then he left. She watched from the living room window as he hopped in his ride and drove away. Once he was out of sight, she removed her shoe from her foot and began to squash every roach she saw out of frustration. She swatted as fast as she could, and they tried to run for their lives. The more she smashed, the more tears fell from her eyes. She couldn't sleep at night wondering why he wanted her to be home at 12. And she thought about everything from him having some fancy European furniture delivered to her door. And she even thought about him coming over in a white tuxedo with the minister, ready to marry her and take her away, so they could live happily ever after. And she enjoyed dreaming about the possibilities of them being together forever. All night long, she tossed and turned on her twin mattress until she fell fast asleep. 8 a.m. came quicker than Janay expected, and she walked to work thinking of an excellent lie that she could tell Mr. Chow. And she thought about not even going to work at all, but that was too risky. She knew she needed the little money that she was making, and she knew she couldn't depend on Scottie. At this point, she didn't even know what they were to each other, or how he even felt about her. And he never really told her much of anything as far as them being together was concerned. And she still had no idea why he was doing all these things for her. Part of it had to be the sex. But what was the other part? By 11:30, she was clutching her stomach and leaning over the front counter like she was in serious pain. "Ah, Janay! You have a baby in you," Mr. Chow said, assuming that Janay was pregnant. And she could only imagine what other thoughts he had in the back of his dirty old mind. "No, Mr. Chow, it's called a period," Janay told him while shooting him a dirty look. She had won him over and he sent her home early for the day. She ran home as fast as her K-Swiss sneakers would allow. And when she came to her block, she could see an Ameritech phone company truck. And there was a white guy standing in front of her door. When she began to unlock the door, he asked her if she knew who Janay Nicolay was.
"That's me," she said, shaking his hand. Without asking any questions, Janay let him follow her upstairs and he started to do some wiring. It didn't take long before he was done. She grabbed his clipboard and signed on a dotted line. And then he left. She took her last $20 and used it to buy a phone from a nearby discount store. Plugging it into the wall was a ceremonial experience for her. She ripped open the package, tossed the instructions and warranty aside, connected the cords, and stuck the plug into the jack. She lifted the receiver to her ear, and the dial tone brought about a big cheese smile across her face. It was a sound that she hadn't heard out of her house in a long time. She sat on the floor next to the phone for a long time, waiting for it to ring. But it never did. No one had the number. There was no one that she could even call just to prove to herself that she really had a phone. She dialed the drugstore, and when Mr. Chow answered, she hung up in his face. She did that 3 times and fell out laughing afterwards. His voice became extra funny when he was angry, and the prank calls were starting to get to him.
"Stop calling here, right? You don't call here, mama. Fuck you."
Just when she was about to do it a 4th time, she remembered the pager that Scottie had given her yesterday. She grabbed it from her coat pocket and slowly dialed the number. 412-6989. When she heard the operator's voice, Janay did as she was instructed and put in her house number. After 30 seconds, it vibrated in her hand, and she couldn't help paging it over and over again. She dozed off in her chair and was awakened by the phone ringing an hour later. It was Scottie calling to check and see if the phone had been connected. Janay thanked him, and before they got off the phone, something made her ask him the questions that had been on her mind for the past 2 weeks. She wanted to know how he felt about her, what she was to him, and why was he doing all these nice things for her.
Yo, it's just something about you, Janay.
Didn't I tell you I'll take care of you?
Now, do you want this or not?
Janay was silent, and she thought about all the conversations that they had and how much of it she missed due to her daydreaming into his eyes. He did tell her that he would look out for her and that she didn't have to worry about anything.
Huh?
He said. The tone in his voice led her to believe that he was getting angry, maybe because she had the nerve to be questioning him. And she did want everything that he had for her and then some. But at what cost? What did he want from her in return? If he wanted to fuck her every now and then, that was okay with Janay. After he hung up, she promised herself that she would never question why again. And she would just go with the flow and take whatever he had for her. And she was in no position to be turning down anything from anybody anyway.
Because before him, she certainly didn't have anything or anybody. And she was alone before Scottie. From this day forward, Janay would just sit back and live. Even though that one question seemed to linger in the back of her mind. Why me?